and favourite. Ding! Now you're in trouble.
Most unlikely of villains, schools of blame and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it bottle? Does it meow? Let on the cerebral. Ever show him so much more? The legal brains at the
Welcome back to Cerebrivore. Today we're doing a bonus episode where we're answering some listener calls. The panel today is BJ, the Arcane Alienist, Carl of the Gemologist Presents, and myself, Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast. At the top of the show, we heard from Colin Green of the Spike Pit podcast and YouTube channel. And Colin, we very much appreciate you favoring us and look forward to any future calls or messages you want to send us. How are you two guys doing today?
Doing pretty good.
Doing well.
Excellent. Yeah. So the first call we have, or first series of calls, I should say we have, are from Joe Salvador of Raven Guy Games. And folks probably know him from Eldritch Tales, which is like an OSR-based Cthulhu game, Lovecrafting game. It's like if you're going to play Call of Cthulhu, but use more OSR-style rules. And he's developing a sword and sorcery game called Reaver that's going to be really cool. Hopefully that'll be in the market soon. He's got some thoughts on religion RPGs. So I'm going to play these, and then we'll see what the panel here thinks.
Hey, fellas. Just calling back about your discussion on religions. I thought it was a great conversation, man. I think you guys had some interesting ideas, and I've really kind of been thinking about it for a couple of days now. I had some thoughts while I was listening, and I wasn't really sure how to, put it together. So I'll just say, I don't really use deities directly in my games very much. Most of my games are low fantasy or sword and sorcery, so it doesn't really fit. I like them to be a bit more mysterious. I let them act through omens and dreams. I think you discussed dreams a little bit, signs, so that the believers who see these things will see the workings of the gods, right? Mass message 1. Yeah, so without using the deities directly in the game as being their own mouthpieces, I like to use temples and cults and different sects of religions to fill that kind of role, right? If you look at just actual history, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or whoever, whatever religion, the different ideas on how that religion should be practiced they create all kinds of strife, right? So whenever you have competing temples to the same god or, new ideas on how to worship an existing deity, that creates amazing role-playing opportunities. They make great adversaries. And then, it's awesome for PCs as well. Yeah, so for PCs, it helps give that player direction, and it can really help them, if they're willing to buy in, it can help them really invest, into the setting and get them involved, basically in the world at large, so to speak. I like playing clerics. The way I approach it, though, I don't think that the cleric is the normal priest. Most priests in a temple are just lay priests. They have no magical power. They oversee ceremonies, they give alms to the poor, they take care of the temple, they scribe books. The cleric player character, or NPC, is the fanatic, the zealot who the god chooses to lend his power to, or her power to. One other thing.
Okay, so that was the first series of calls. Joe has some more calls, but let's answer these first, I think. there's some really good ideas here, and the idea of competing churches of the same faith, right? So your priest might be at odds with another temple, in a neighboring town or something like that. I mean, that's definitely real world stuff we could pull into our games.
Right. I mean, just look at the history of the Catholic Church in medieval times, and they had the era where there were two different guys claiming to be the Pope, one in Rome and one in France. You guys ever either read The Name of the Rose or seen the film version of The Name of the Rose? It's set against a backdrop of the the Benedictines and the Franciscans and the other. I can't remember. I think it was one other. They're calling each other heretics, and I think the movie plays it up a little more than it exists in the book. But you don't even have to go outside of one religion to see that there are schisms and fractions and factions and stuff like that. I think Forgotten Realms even does that. And there's the Shar, who's the goddess of night, but then there's an evil goddess, but then there's a heretical faction of they change the name a little bit and they're good, but their clerics still get spells. So it's like, well, where are these heretics getting their clerical spells from?
Right. And that's have you done things like that in the past, Carl?
No. I mean, I think, unfortunately, a lot of, that's a rare example. I think that BJ cites. And normally it's right. It's like temple from one god versus temple of another god in most of the games, right? You rarely do have like the ability to have like a monolithic religion, but then with different factions. I think I like what I think Joe referenced in the Buddhist Temple Wars. Is that correct? So you could definitely do that like in an Asian adventure style setting. I think actually like the Karator setting, it was like the Shikenja were, unlike a specific priest or a specialty priest in, AD&D or whatever, there was like, they really say the Shikenja, however you pronounce that, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but, kind of worships the whole pantheon and is like an intermediary with the lay people for the whole pantheon. So, but then you would have different sects that come out. I mean, you even have like temple warriors in an Asian Adventures game. So, and then, I mean, you cite the different factions in Catholicism, but it's Sunni versus Shiite has always been a big thing. So I think if you had a world like that, you could really use real world religious strife as a touchstone, which I think would be a cool thing, but it wouldn't be traditional, right? It wouldn't be traditional. And then with the sword and sorcery, I mean, that Joe Salvatore is particularly fond of, it's more like they're cults, right? They're different cults, and you have like the omens and the shamans who can interpret these omens and signs. And so go ahead, BJ, you're gonna say something.
I would say it continues today to see like I think there's been a recent schism in the Presbyterian Church. There's one ongoing in the United Methodist Church over different differences about doctrine and traditional versus modern approaches to stuff. So
right, but you wouldn't even have to have a schism per se, right? You could have just a rivalry between your churches too.
Right.
Neither one's necessarily saying the other one's a heretic, as much as they're saying we're the better Temple of Apollo, right, or whatever, right? And I think have that kind of thing going on.
That's sort of been the again, to go back to Forgotten Realms, because it's sort of the default. It's become the default for D&D. Generally is presented as, there are some gods that have enmity towards one another, particularly when they have very different alignment. But for most of the part, the good and neutral deities tolerate each other. But there's a competition for devotees. So that they're trying to, the god with the most worshipers is the most powerful. So even though they tolerate each other and they recognize that, hey, we have to have a goddess of agriculture. Right. So I don't want Shantae to go anywhere, but I want more worshipers for my, tier. Yeah, agrees that, but he wants more worshipers for his, devotion to justice.
I love that competing temples idea you brought up, Jason, too, because that reminds me of like, very much, like the novel by Ken Follett, The Pillars of the Earth, where each town we need to propose to have the biggest, baddest, most ornate, church. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it definitely is something you could that could be. I think that could be a really fun, mini campaign or addition to make your real. Like I think one of the premises we had in our discussion about religion is to make it feel more real for the player, and getting like something involved around an adventure. I think could really draw players in. We all, it could be hey guys, I go to the dungeon with you, but we want to. My religion is, or as the cleric would say, my religion is kind of asking me to do this. Can you guys help me? Right. So you could have all sorts of fun adventures with that.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily, so you're having this friendly rivalry with the other temple, but if a threat comes up, you'll still work together, right?
Right.
Still,
you could do something cool like that.
So, but I want to. So BJ brought up this idea with the Pantheon and the talk about different gods in the Pantheon, and one thing we could look at in media today right now would be like Moon Knight on Disney, but that actually feeds into the next series of calls from Joe. So I think I
had still another comment. I had another comment on what Joe said. Because I like what his approach is, and we definitely see it in games that he's running. That if you've had ability to be able to play with them, but I really like that idea of like the gods being subtle. I mean, that you have like omens and signs and an intermediary. I mean, as opposed to. I know he's running sword and sorcery kind of. Well, it's not really Bronze Age, but then like in contrast, you still have like cults and Bronze Age in like RuneQuest where the gods are very apparent. So I guess it depends on what you like in your campaign, but I prefer the subtlety. I prefer this. I do personally. I don't know. What about you guys?
Well, I think omens and signs are a way to do it more subtle, to be a little more grounded, but also it's kind of a way for the DM to give clues to players who may be kind of getting off in the weeds, or they've missed some of the plot hooks as to what the adventure's about, and that's just certainly without railroading them. That's a way to the DM through maybe the cleric's deity. So you kind of get a vision, and you see this, and you feel like your patron deity is telling you to look for this particular, geographical formation or this particular weather pattern. Or when you see that, you'll know you're on the right track.
Yeah, he's not on this call or on in this panel today, but Joe Richter in the Pathfinder game that I'm currently playing with him, his Wrath of the Righteous game, he's doing a lot with dreams where the character and they're not necessarily straightforward. So, some of the dream might be pertinent, some of it might not be or whatever, but, using dreams to kind of,
I think it's a great tool.
Put plot hooks and things in the characters' heads and push them.
One of the things that Joe said in his calls, which I think is interesting, is the idea that clerics are not the bog standard priests. And I think D&D, maybe, I don't know if it was always that way, but I know we've kind of evolved to the point where there's an expectation of if I can find a temple, there's healing available. Like the idea that these are just lay priests or acolytes who, perform mundane rituals and kind of like a priest in the real world does.
They're more like Templars or war priests, right? Like the cleric.
Yeah, and the clerics have a special. I like that idea, although I think you may get some pushback from players who are very used to the idea of we can make it back to town and get to the temple. We can get some. Make a donation and get healed up, because and a lot of the modules do it that way. When there's any attendant in any temple or at any shrine is a cleric or a druid.
But that fixes the problem of, well, why is there disease in the town, and why if you have these
because
the temple there with all these clerics there, why aren't they automatically healing and doing all these good things? Well, they can't because they're not. It's only the select few that can do that.
Or they need a donation.
But if you look at the fiction that we kind of sometimes draw on for our ideas, like real world based fiction, you think about like fictional stories where you find out there's a secret order of priests that the Vatican has that perform exorcisms, or that they hunt vampires, or they protect an ancient treasure or something like that. It's not, there are all these orders of priests or types of priests that don't do those kind of things. And you've got priests with a special skill set or a special mandate, and they're given extra latitude. To me, that seems like the kind of priest who can say, hey, a very devoted follower of my deity. We're aligned. I when I meditate and pray, I get clear visions, or I can read the omens, and so I don't have to sit in a temple and hear people's confessions and perform marriage ceremonies and things like that. I have latitude to go out in the world and kind of set my own agenda, because everything I do is in the greater service of the deity I worship, and that allows me to live the life of an adventurer.
Yeah, Greyhawk does that with like St. Cuthbert. There are different orders of St. Cuthbert. They have they wear different colors or whatever, and they have different missions.
Because I think that's a question that comes up a lot of times too, is, well, why is your cleric, where's the home temple, and why are they out wandering around when they need to be tending to the sick but there's a reason why the deity said, the world needs heroes and you need to go out and be one of them.
I think Hyperborea has like a temple priest subclass too, that if your player is very interested in that and kind of being involved in sort of being the temple priest and not so much the warrior priest who goes out into the wild, they do have that option. I don't know, I've never played that subclass, but it is there. And I guess since they're less martial and more esoteric, well, there are some benefits, but there are definitely some like obligations, right? So I don't know, and that could be like, that's a tough sell sometimes, I think, for players, because they don't want to be to one location. I guess it depends on what story you're trying to tell and with the makeup of your players, right, and what they want to do.
Yep.
He also mentioned clerics as being kind of zealots, and I like that idea very much. That the clerics have this special, maybe connection or devotion that even other priests don't have. So you can start to see historical figures like Joan of Arc as almost being more of in this case, maybe a paladin. But the other thing is, I don't know, this may be a whole other discussion. I may have brought this up in our previous episode. It's interesting. I've observed this just in 30 plus years of playing D&D since the 80s with people my age and kind of people younger and then younger and younger down into now sometimes running games for teenagers. As our society has become more secular, fewer and fewer people have a reference point for how to role play someone who is religious. And it's so, I don't know how you address that. And that may be another topic for another discussion, or it may be getting into more of a charged area we don't want to open up. But I like the idea of a cleric as a zealot, but I don't know that many people have an idea of how to play a religious zealot, or at least a very devout person, the way they might have in 1980.
Because you're not challenging. Because you don't. I mean, you've got what you see in popular media with evangelistic stuff, particularly your Christian evangelists, things like that. Yeah. But that may or may not actually be what would work. What would be right in the game world, right? Yeah. So
I'm surprised. Topic. Yeah, I'm surprised. Like in Daredevil, how much they reference his Catholicism, right? Mm-hmm. That's very different than I think than other way they treat other characters in that universe or other characters in general, right?
Well, I was just going to say, Moon Knight, they reference the fact is, the Judaism, but they don't go into like the depth like what you see in Daredevil. It's not nearly
they just acknowledge that that's his family background. But for Daredevil, his Catholic faith is a core tenet of his character.
Yeah, it is, right. That's what. Yeah, I guess that BJ is more eloquent in stating that what I was trying to get out, that idea of it. But I see it a lot, and I think that is honestly rare in a secular world, right? That is. I wouldn't say promoted. It's not like they're ramming Catholicism down your throat, but it does.
Yeah,
it's part of what makes Murdoch Daredevil, right? Matthew Murdoch Daredevil.
And in the Netflix series, it gives you one of the all-time greatest Daredevil lines where he's in confession. He says, "I'm not asking for forgiveness for what I've done. It's what I'm about to do."
Yeah.
All right. Let's but since we're talking about Daredevil, now I tried to segue too early before, but let's segue into that idea of the Pantheons. Okay. And like I say, like what we see in Moon Knight, you have multiple gods in that pantheon. Well, in our D&D worlds and our fantasy worlds, the vast majority of the religions are pantheons. They're multiple deities. They're not, they're not just a single deity. And Joe had some comments on that. So I'm going to play Joe's calls and then we can answer those.
One other thing I wanted to talk about, and this isn't really an original thought. I feel like I've heard this discussed. But it's the idea that, we approach fantasy religions with certain ideas about religion ingrained into us already. And mostly revolving around monotheistic religion and how it is practiced. There's only one God. All other gods are false. There's only one way to practice, that kind of thing. And in the fantasy world, what that usually leads to is that the gods are competing with one another, or the different clerics are competing with one another. My god is real, your god isn't. My god's greater than your god, or whatever. And I think in the ancient world, that wasn't really the case. And Rome provides a pretty good example of that. The Romans regularly adopted deities from their neighbors, like the Etruscans, from conquered peoples, like Egyptians or Celts. Just integrated those deities directly into their own pantheon, either whole cloth, perhaps renaming it, or linking those deities to their own deities. I think in Tacitus, he considers Odin linked to Mercury. I'm not sure why. So, I mean, in a fantasy world, I think that is something that would happen, and it would allow people normal people, to basically approach whatever deity they think would be most favorable to them, to get the assistance that they need. So yeah, trying to get back to what my point was, but so yeah, if polytheism is the norm in fantasy worlds, there's no reason to believe that commoners or PCs, unless they are clerics or paladins or something, there's no reason to think that they would just only worship one god. They would just visit whatever deity or temple they think would be most favorable to them to solve whatever predicament they're in. If they need help with the fields, they go to the fertility deity or whatever. And I think we could probably see more of that in games. So yeah, I don't know. I need to cut it off here. I'm actually losing my train of thought, like I said, and I keep getting interrupted. So all the best, man. Cheers.
Hey, y'all. It's
Okay. So some great ideas and ruminations there from Joe. I mean, how often do we do that? How often do we have games where, we have these pantheons, and so you have the multiple deities, but how often are they going and paying respect to each of the different deities as opposed to, just that one particular one the character picks?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say Joe definitely puts his ideas into his games. I would say that he definitely, when in the Reaver game, for example, my character, who is a shaman, he is approached to beseech the ancestors and the spirits to help with various things that ancestors and spirits would help with. Whether it's farming or moving rocks, or blessing a pregnant mother, or the health of your livestock. He really is dived into that, I think, to bring out and make the world more real. So I think it's great that Joe is putting these ideas into place, and I think it makes for a more rich world, right? It's a living, breathing world, less vanilla, more substance. Although the irony, of course, is vanilla is a hard to get sometimes, addition to your, but you know what I mean. I mean, it's so yeah, I think it's really cool what Joe does in his games.
Well, one thing I find interesting is if we do this idea, which is kind of like your Greek or Roman idea, right? And you've got and so you have your multi deities that potentially everybody's going to pay respect to. You can do what they've done, where a deity that that the character hasn't visited recently might get you could play in that jealousy or that kind of thing. You know, those jealousies. We see we see it all the time in Greek mythology, right?
Right.
But you know, so you could potentially get dreams from a deity you haven't visited. You know, they end up being more ominous or whatever. So there's different ways you could play that up. What do you think, BJ?
Well, I think one, it's on the DM to use that as window dressing to say, oh, well, you're about to get on a ship. Well, custom is that you go to the temple of the god of the sea or the god of storms, and you offer a donation and get a blessing on your voyage. You know, and not doing that, you might offend that deity and have a mishap. You know, you're passing through a farming village. There's going to be a shrine to the god of agriculture. You know, and I think we may have mentioned this before too, whereas, you know, do something real simple like, hey, you know, if you give a gold piece, you've got a +1 bonus to any roll sometime in the next 24 hours, just to reinforce that the characters believe this and it kind of happens. So I think one, it's on the, like I said, it's on the DM to put that in little places here and there pretty regularly, just to reinforce that that's the reality of the world that the characters inhabit. And the idea that people will go to different, unless you're just a zealot, an absolute devotee. You know, I think like in ancient Greece, I don't know if they did in Rome. I think they may have in Rome as well. But in ancient Greece, that's how most people were. Whichever god was relevant to the task or the situation, always Zeus, and then anybody else that, or the patron of the city, but then anybody else that you may need. But then there would be these mystery cults of these people who were just highly devoted to the one god or goddess. And they would have secret rites and secret meetings and their own, you know, alignment language.
Yeah, and you'd go to them for
things like that.
And you go to them for the special blessings, right?
Right. But the other idea would be, especially if you're a character who's not overly attached to one deity. I mean, it may be that a deity just randomly realizes, hey, here's this adventurer who has a skill set that might be able to do something that would be really important to me. And so I don't necessarily want them to become a lifelong follower of me, but I might give them a little bit of an enticement to do something that furthers my agenda, you know, for this adventure or this quest or this phase of their life. And
definitely.
You know, maybe they'll be a follower of me after that, or maybe not. But that's more the deity not wanting an adoration, but it's the deity has, I want that gem stolen from a rival god's temple, or I want that artifact recovered from a dragon's hoard, or something like that. And you seem to be the person in close proximity with the best chance of doing it. So,
well, when that kind of plays in, sorry, I didn't even cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. That kind of plays into the way, and this goes into Joe's first call as well. The idea where the gods are they're interacting with the world through intermediaries, right? And the PCs potentially are going to become one of those intermediaries, intermediaries, or they could be. And I like that idea because I like that, you know, as opposed to an avatar of that god appearing on the planet. And, you know, at that point now we get in kind of railroad territory, or, you know, the characters become sidekicks or something, right? But if the characters are actually tasked to do these things, then they still have, you know, they still have their agency, and they're doing this. But it's, you know, so I kind of like that kind of thing. I also really like the idea of, and you could incorporate this easily enough into cities having their own patron deities, like we saw back then. But, you know, so potentially you're entering the city, you might not want to be too spoken if you're, you know, if the deity that you worship isn't overly favored in that city, right? If you have rival cities or this kind of thing, or could cause problems. I think there's a lot of fun things you can do with these ideas, incorporating it. But it comes back to what BJ was talking about earlier. You know, players have to want to engage. The DM can set this up, but the players have to be willing to engage in it.
Yeah,
you know, and that's that you have to get the buy-in.
Yeah, and I think you have to condition them. You got to give them. You know, you go to the temple and you get a blessing, and then every time they go to the temple, they get a blessing. They're going to be like, you know, this just helps my character. I want to go to the temple and get a blessing, and then it becomes like, you know, Pavlovian like condition as you give characters.
Well, it becomes one of those
but
things.
That's okay.
Like,
I mean, I guess
we're setting out for the dungeon. Do we have enough arrows? Do we have enough torches? Do we have rations?
Have we gone to the temple?
Have we gone to the temple and everybody
right?
gotten their blessing?
Yeah.
It's like,
sure.
okay, you get your vaccine before you go into the jungle, you know?
Yeah. That's cool.
He mentioned, though, us viewing things in terms of monotheism, and this is just kind of a side comment, but I think I'm reminded that when Gary Gygax first started playing D&D with his friends, they kept asking him, the clerics were just servants of the non-specific gods. He never got any more specific than that, and the players kept saying, we want real gods, we want real god, we want gods. And so the first two gods he created were kind of just almost like a tongue-in-cheek satire, and one of them was Saint Cuthbert, who walked around hitting people upside the head to knock some sense into them with his cudgel, and the other was Fultus. And the joke on Fultus is one of many gods in the world of Greyhawk, but he insists that he's the only god, and his zealous followers insist that he is the only god, and his way is the only way. And it was kind of a pastiche satire of the zealot. Whereas I guess the Cuthbert's followers are equally zealous, but they're a little more practical about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. And
knock that off. That's stupid.
Yeah. The other thing he did that Joe brought up is this idea of Rome, the empire, subsuming or incorporating gods from other cultures, and that could be a really cool idea. And whether or not the players buy on, if they're from the imperial culture in your game world, or the I guess the client state culture in your game world, and whether they buy into the new way we're going to look at this deity that my people have been worshiping for a long time, or the old way, and that could lead to a lot of interesting stories and conflict. But I know Midgard by Cobalt Press, they do that sort of, different aspects of one particular deity depending on the location on where they're at. So I think that's kind of what Rome almost did. Is Isis is also Aphrodite, right? But you can call her Isis in Egypt, but in Rome, or when the Romans worship Isis, they worship that deity as Aphrodite, as an example, right? So, but that's very interesting, and how the real world, I guess, political entities will try to incorporate. And even like when Constantine became declared Christianity for Rome, so the Emperor Constantine, same thing. He subsumed a popular religion, and of course made it a state religion, as opposed to like the various. And I guess that's when you had all these like kind of disparate sects that BJ mentioned in the previous comment, and now they're like, now we have one, and that's it.
Yeah, right? we've got
no more Arian, no more
convene a council of Nicaea to declare what is and is doctrine.
Yes. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. So that in and of itself, you could mirror something like that in your game world, where this empire comes in and says, okay, it's great that you worship this deity and we love it. We're going to give money to your temple, but this is how you got to do it. Yeah. That's kind of cool. It's interesting, I think.
It's interesting. I don't know if you guys, I've read a couple of books. I read a book and took one of the audio classes you can get on Audible from Bart Ehrman, who's a religious scholar. He's a Bible scholar, but he himself is not religious. He's an atheist, but he treats it as literature and historical and archaeology is kind of his approach to it. And he points out that that there were actually very relatively little persecution of Christians in Rome. That the Romans were very tolerant of other people. As long as they didn't disrupt the public order, you could have whatever religion you wanted. And the times from the records he could look at where these isolated pogroms against Christians would come out would be because they were refusing to contribute to the public ceremonies that the Romans believed is how Jupiter and Mars continued to favor Rome. And so it'd be like transcripts from a Roman, official kind of interviewing these Christians going, look, I don't care. Just make the donation. Just tell me you understand Caesar is divine. Wink, wink, and get out of my office and it'll be okay. And of course, but at that point, these Christians were like, no, I want to be martyred like Christ. Kill me, kill me, kill me. And so, but then as the empire became Christianized, and it was in a vested interest in the Christian, and now in power to kind of promote this propaganda that they were widely persecuted against and they were thrown to the lions in the Colosseum. And it happened, but it didn't happen near as much as we kind of may think of it today. But I think that would be an interesting thing to draw on, as well as kind of the politics of that in a, you would probably want to use fictionalized religions, but
yeah.
But yeah,
I think
there's a cultural shift going on, and an old religion is dying, and a new religion or an old god is coming out of favor, and a new god is rising to prominence.
Well, we saw this. Sorry.
What does that do to a society? There'll be some good city-based adventures.
Yeah.
Right. And you saw this with the Normans, right? Where, Charlemagne, or it wasn't Charlemagne, that was France. But anyway, the Normans switched to Christianity, and then the son went back to the old religion, your Norse, and then it went back to Christianity and ended up staying there. But the idea of that back and fro, and what is your cleric doing when his religion's outlawed? Right.
Oh, yeah.
See, it took them a long time. Like Sweden was the last European country to Christianize, and I think you saw some similar things in Eastern Europe with the Slavic culture, where there was this period of time where people practiced both Orthodox Christianity and their traditional Slavic, which is not identical but somewhat similar to Norse and Germanic. They just kind of coexist. And I think you can see that in a lot of places, and then recently colonized or clients, people who've had another culture come in and start to overtake their own indigenous culture. They continue, but you see a mixture of. You can see that now in a lot of, at least I know here in Oklahoma, a lot of American Indian. There'll be Christians, but they also continue to sometimes have certain more traditional beliefs about spirits and things like that are more in line with their more indigenous way of being.
Santeria too, right? Santeria down here in South Texas and the Southwest. Latin cultures, right? But you saw. That's how they got the religion to the people, right? So that's how. Look at England and Ireland, right? And the early Christianity in those places, where that's how they incorporated a lot of the Celtic gods and goddesses, right, into the new Christian religion and the festivals and all that, right? And we still have holdover of that. So that's kind of that's what religions do. They're not. I guess they more than we realize, they morph and change to suit effectively the needs of the people. One hopes the needs of the people, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and a great example of that, but a great example. Look at Iceland. So Iceland, from all accounts, was very happy, with the Norse religion, but for economic reasons, they voted. And all thing, it was a democratic process. They voted to officially switch to Christianity because of economic and trade reasons.
Yeah. So I think I read a while back that the vast majority of people in Iceland still believe in the I guess what their version of a gnome would be, the Tomty, the the little people.
Yeah.
Even though they otherwise might have a Christian view of God and heaven and salvation and things like that. It's really fascinating to see how that. I'm sure I'm not an expert on Japan, but I'd be really interested to talk to somebody who's more about Japan, about sort of the coexistence of Buddhism and Shinto.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got one more call here, if you guys want to take that. And this is from James Schraw of Subclass Act, who's it's a solo actual play podcast. Currently he's doing Traveler over there, season 3. He's only about 4 episodes in, folks, so you can catch up really quickly. It's a really interesting podcast. But he wants to talk about doing a shared kind of universe thing. So I'm going to play his call.
It's James from Subclass Act. I've been really enjoying the episodes. I'm still in the middle of one, but I really enjoy the panel discussions. The shared universe thing is really cool to me. And the more I was thinking about it, it strikes me that Runehammer has been talking about something like this recently, because the index card RPG stuff, hard suits, all that stuff is all kind of in the same universe. But even in one genre, he kind of has that where he talks about, like, if he has like a desert adventure, then the next one will be the opposite. It'll be like, lush jungle or something like that, and sort of the different areas having the different kinds of fiction, kind of like you were talking about with Pathfinder does that stuff. So I think there's cool ways you can do that. You can go everything from like slight different flavors all the way to totally different genres, different systems, whatever. I think it's cool, and I think it's very rad. So that, plus the sort of West Marches kind of thing you're talking about with people sliding in and out, sounds really cool. So anyways, yeah, thanks. Take care, y'all.
Okay, yeah. And, it's interesting because in the different games with ICRPG, the different realms he has, like Alfheim, which is the fantasy version of that, and Warp Shell with sci-fi, there's always been ties between those. But in even second edition, there are hints that there are ties between these different, settings. But now it's come out more. It's more obvious as more, setting materials published, and we go more in depth into it. But yeah, the idea of having a shared, which now this isn't new to Runehammer by any means. You saw this with Shadowrun, which fed back into what was the was it Earth, not Earth series, that's a book series, Earth Dawn, because Earth Dawn was a previous iteration of that world, right? Can you speak to that, BJ?
Well, I'm not as familiar, but I know the idea with Shadowrun is, in Shadowrun is Earth has a past history that's more magical, high fantasy, and that and in Shadowrun, what's happened is those old, I can't remember if it's like the genes that lie in humanity that from back when they intermingled with elves and dwarves, get reactivated, and people being born as orcs and elves, and it's reawakened. It's like this. In the modern era, there's like
I guess the ebbs and flows of magic and how it incorporates into the world. So way back in the Earth Dawn days, it was a magical type universe, and then Shadowrun, the reawakening happened. Right, that's what I call it, the reawakening, I guess. Right,
but they're different ages, right? Earth Dawn
they're different ages.
The fourth age, and Shadowrun's sixth.
And Champions does that too, right? There's ups and downs of when you become a superhero, because that's magic based, or weird tech. So you can make your super duper powered armor occur. So there's waxes and wanes between science and fantasy, I guess. Right, technology and magic go back and forth, which is kind of a neat concept. Yeah, at Earth Dawn, there was actually an adventure in the. Yes, I played Earth Dawn, believe it or not. But there was an adventure where you can you had adventure where you're trying to find relics from the original Earth Dawn in the Shadowrun era. So I think you actually, there is even some like time travel, so you could go back, right, and do that, which is kind of cool.
There's also, I think, they've clearly moved past it at this point, but I think initially there was sort of hints that Warhammer 40K was just the far-flung future of Warhammer Fantasy, and then they as they began to build the 40K lore, they moved away from that. But it's our future as opposed to.
Well, Age of Sigmar even makes that more clear, because you have effectively Space Marines and
Stormcast Eternals.
Yeah, Stormcast Eternals are effectively Space Marines. But
what chapter are your Eternals? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, that's some 40K lingo and jargon for you folks. The other interesting thing, and the irony, is that a great shared universe with multiple GMs would be Traveler, and that's what James is running. I think
it would too. Yeah,
because you could hey, BJ, you run Solomani Rim. Hey, Carl, you run, Spinward Marches. Hey, Jason, I know you're not familiar with Traveler, but just run a space opera type game in the classic.
Make up your own world
and put it anywhere, and it's the even the small part of the classic Traveler universe is big enough that you could put it anywhere. And that's actually what James has done. I mean, I've called into a show and man, I know you're not doing classic Traveler, but you are throwing some Easter eggs in there inadvertently that harken back to some of the things that Mark Miller and others put into the Traveler universe. So you could do it wherever, right? You could do it even, hey, maybe we're not in the Traveler universe, we're in some far-flung colony that never got incorporated into the Imperium, right? So, right,
well, you mentioned that.
What you do is you can create worlds with different, because Traveler allows for worlds that still have medieval level of technology.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've always wanted to.
And you could then impose some sort of Star Trek style prime directive where, hey, you've got an objective, but when you visit this world, you have to limit yourself to the.
Well, you know,
the red zones and amber zones, right? Red zones and amber zones, for sure.
Yeah, we have plenty of games out there actually, though, that you don't have to have that prime directive per se. But Deadlands does this too, doesn't it, Carl? With Hell on Earth, and it has the Norse setting, Deadlands Noir, doesn't it? Have the timeline
you do different timelines, right? You could even throw, if you like ETU and you want to be a bunch of Buffys and Slayers, you could kind of meld Noir and ETU, and in fact, that's what the authors are kind of doing. I feel like we did this. Emmy and I did this legacy set of games at ChupacabraCon, and the authors are play testing a product, and they don't mind us sharing it because they want us to share it. But they're doing like a legacy thing where you're like ETU 1888, which is Deadlands, ETU 1932, which is Deadlands Noir. I mean, you know what I mean? So they're kind of wanting to incorporate that so that you can kind of go back and forth. Hey, you guys could travel to New Orleans for Deadlands Noir in your 1932 ETU, field trip, right? So I think it's pretty cool. People are thinking about that. I think that's what's really neat. So it's this collective zeitgeist of, hey, let's make this kind of shared universe, shared world, different time, shared timeline even, and you can jump back and forth.
Yeah, I guess shared timeline's kind of what we're looking at, right?
Yeah,
that idea with the different eras.
I'm sorry, I just got the newest second issue of Carcass Crawler, which is the old school essential zine, and it has rules for energy weapons.
Oh, Gamma World.
So the previous one had rules for firearm, black powder firearms. Mm-hmm. So I think depending on which rule set, I mean, even there, like you could, or white box, you've got the conventional white box, which is just OD&D, but then they've done
World War II,
different versions of white box. As long as those rule sets are compatible, you can. I think most rule sets maybe can't do everything, but there's a lot of flexibility in most rule sets to where you could set up different time periods with different levels of technology and have them.
Yeah, I mean,
whether it's time travel, different planets, or Pathfinder.
Yeah, Gavin Norman's talked about before he launched OSE. There was talk about doing a post-apocalyptic, and I think that's still in the back burner somewhere. That he's probably working towards that.
Yeah, it'd be Mutant OSE, MOSE. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, like the Starship Warden stuff, right? They use a siege engine, Castles in Crusade Siege, and right they say, hey, you can use siege here at Starship Warden, but then it's like you don't know, right? If you're a native to the Starship Warden, it's this kind of sleeper, what's it called, generational ship that's been lost to at any time, to whatever timeline it is, and then you can, if you're a native, you would never know, right? So you'd use like a medieval set, but then you find weird technology. So there's always been this kind of neat blending of different technologies.
I wonder
even the new Pathfinder 2, which is what I was gonna, is that like the new Pathfinder 2 adventure path is like takes place. It looks, I mean, it's totally Deadlands. I mean, it's totally like guns and weird science and constructs. So
I'm really, and I don't know because I'm not familiar. I'm just vaguely starting to get into Pathfinder 2 as a player. But does Starfinder easily compatible with either version of Pathfinder?
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but it is like a shared timeline. Yeah, it is a shared timeline. So like, because the planet blew up in ages past, and it's now and now you have only a station, because the station is called Absalom, right? That's the big giant water deep equivalent city in Golarion. So yeah, it's a shared timeline, but it's vague. It's vague when it happened. We lost a lot of data and technology in years past, and there was some sort of cataclysm. Yeah, right. So I kind of like Age of Sigmar too, right? Age of Sigmar, so some sort of cataclysm.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wonder, because you can always use the Pathfinder rules for a different setting.
Yeah.
Between that possibility and with the kind of the return of Spelljammer for the big dog, if we might not see a little more zeitgeist of, at some point we're going to go world hopping, whether that's traveling through space, traveling through portals, because I think if I'm looking at the way they seem to be putting Spelljammer together, I think it's going to also be a backdoor into Planescape. They're going to kind of meld those two, the kind of way they did in 4th edition. So it's
like either, jump gates to the central nexus.
Yeah, either we spell jam between worlds, or we find a way to get to Sigil, either by sailing there on a spell jammer or finding a hidden door, and then we can use Sigil to kind of hop around the multiverse. But again, D&D has its own implied default setting, but you can always strip out the setting and rename things and reskin things. And but I kind of wonder if that's going to start entering kind of the popular zeitgeist for fantasy role playing. And so let's go world hopping, by ship or by teleportation or by hopping, going through a conjoined plane, through a portal. But and that opens it up to the idea. What if the DM runs 3 different DMs run 3 different corners of this multiverse or this campaign? And
you could totally do that. Like one of the best kind of meldings of that I remember seeing, I didn't do it myself, but there's a 3.0, 3.5 game called the Dragon Star. I don't know if you remember Dragon Star, and it was effectively D&D in space before Starfinder became Pathfinder in space. And it's unlike Spelljammer because you actually have like technology and sci-fi. But one of the best meldings I saw was when the Dragon Star people found Toril and invaded the Forgotten Realms. So it's like the storyboard on N-World a long time ago. This guy really he was writing recaps, right, of what happened, and he had Forgotten Realms characters be like rebels in the brunt of this invasion by these powerful, technologically superior, but magic using creatures, right? It came from space. So you could do all crazy fun meldings like that. So I guess James has inspired us to think about this.
Well, here's what I just off the top of my head. What if you ran Blades in the Dark and everybody's a member of a thieves guild, but it's a thieves guild set in Sigil, and every heist or job is you got to open a gate to Orth or Kryn or Faerun or someplace, and that's where the adventure takes place. But then the successful is not only to grab the MacGuffin or assassinate the enemy or whatever the case may be, but then you got to get back to the door and get back to Sigil where you're safe.
Yeah, or erase. Like a great one would be like you could do like Barrier Peaks, right? Like, oh, this kind of weird event happened. It's like this weird event happened, and that's going to kind of ruin the timeline and technology of Greyhawk of Orth, and we got to send you there to neutralize that. Right? You become like it's like Silja Delta Green.
Well, the advantage of that is because it's a fantasy
Sigil
world.
X-Files, right? Yeah.
The advantage of that over a real world time travel game is the paradoxes are easier to hand wave off. There's not, one of the problems, and there's a whole nother episode to talk about time travel. But the issue with a time travel game if we're using our history, real world history, is it's so hard to the ripples and the problems you'd cause, and then riffing off that. Where using the fantasy world, it'd be a lot easier to do that time travel game. Ramifications. But I think that's maybe we wait and talk. I think time travel's episode 1. But
BJ, you got to dust off your old Planescape stuff. I got to track down that box set. I did track down like the what's that one? The Dark Sun box set. I got that. So, but that's crazy second edition. I realize every time I look in the second edition, I realize how crazy it is. So,
the second edition was the edition of settings.
The edition of what?
I mean, it was the edition of settings. I mean, you kind of had going into second edition, you had kind of 4 variants on kind of traditional fantasy, and then in second edition they just piled on.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. Well, I think maybe, unless you guys have any closing thoughts, maybe we'll cut it off there. Thank you for helping me answer these calls. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you, callers. Thank you, Joe and James.
And
Also,
Colin.
thank you, Colin, for the enthusiasm.
And Colin, yes, for the beep.
So
We got to
will.
get Colin on a panel at some point.
I know.
Yep, we're going to work on that. We've
He
got
needs
a
to
number
talk
of
about
people.
his game
Yeah.
system that's coming out. His new game system, or his new old game system. Right?
Is that roll dice, make some shit up, roll some more dice?
Yep. Yeah.
Lots of ins and outs there, but yeah, let's we'll cut it off here, and we'll catch everybody next week.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you want to participate, you can leave us a message using the Anchor app, or go to our website, leave a message. You can send an email to cerebrivore@gmail.com. You can comment on our YouTube page. If we'll if you ask a question somewhere, we'll read it and try to get back to you on one of these bonus episodes. And if you are interested in joining us as a guest on a topic, reach out and we can maybe work that out too. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to everybody later. Take care.
A Nerd Central broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the Spinal Tap strong. Y'all styles and pods past, Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's blowing your teeth, oh, so escaping your brain. Baby, what I mean is this is shades of fake, and from what I understand, don't look now, the Cerebral is coming, and all that's left. Crying and the running, you can bring it, you can hide, you can bomb in any order. Just another brain of legal tossers running for the border. Just a snack like a one. Can I stutter? Beer and beer. It's very splendid buzz. You can eat on a bacon, and his customers never say it. It's insane.